Hi, everyone. Welcome. It is May. I can't believe how quickly this year is flying by, and here we are in May. I'm Bridget Harper. I am the VP of Customer Success here at Clearly Rated, and I'm really excited to share really this stage, this platform, this fun Zoom call with a couple really inspirational leaders in this space. We're going to talk about data integrity surveys, really going through nitty-gritty, but also there's not going to be system specific because we want to really just give some overviews of some best practices. But one of the things that I really like to do is share really our LinkedIn. So one of the nice things here in your chat, as you've got opportunities to network with peers. So there's our LinkedIn in chat. Go ahead and pop yours in. It's a lovely way to be able to see who's all here. Connect with us. So then afterwards, you can always reach out for additional questions. This webinar is being recorded. It'll get shared after. So if you have to hop off because something else comes up, maybe your power goes out. We don't know. You never know what's going to happen when you're attending any of these webinars, or someone will just knock on your door. If you work from home, that could happen. Then you might hear my dog barking. But anyway, as we embark on this, I'm going to stop sharing so we can see our lovely panelists and their full faces. I'm going to introduce who we've got alongside me. First is Katie Tolin. She's a dynamic leader in the accounting and advisory space. Katie is the founder of CPA Growth Guides and is a nationally recognized expert in firm growth strategy. With over 20 years of experience in professional services marketing and business development, she brings a wealth of knowledge on how firms can create intentional, measurable growth. She's also an inductee to the Accounting Marketing Hall of Fame. Katie, my word, what do you do on the weekends here? And she's a past president of the Association for Accounting Marketing. So in addition to that, she's also a frequent industry speaker and published author. So welcome, Katie. I really always like to start these off with a quick question that you're going to probably spend 5 minutes answering because of all of your knowledge. But as we dive into this topic of data integrity, what are some of the most common issues that you've seen firms encounter when trying to merge data from different systems?
Well, first of all, the systems don't talk. So you're still seeing firms that are exporting everything into Excel and trying to get stuff to match. And then you get these templates that are like, oh, we need it in this format and use this header. And so it's kind of a pain. So there's a lot of manual Excel data manipulation on the back end to actually even get something in some usable format. So I think that's the biggest thing. Like everything from, I love when somebody enters into the system the person's name in all caps. So, if I'm going to send out an email, I'm like yelling at Bridget and then other people don't, they actually use sentence case. So everything from like how they call them to how you enter data, you know, PO, physical addresses, PO box, do you put dots? Do you not put dots? Like there's so much inconsistency in what we want our data to look like.
Oh, yes, the screaming my name when you send me an email. I love it. I don't. That inconsistency, it is. I mean, some of those challenges of syncing all of this too, let me guess, it's not going to take 5 minutes, right, Katie?
No, no. And I think it is. It's like, tech makes things much faster. Now, I'm not saying there still might not be some cleanup if you have the right technology in place, but that's the difference between an hour and a week.
Yeah. Yes. And it's an ongoing process too, depending on where you're getting all of this data coming in. It's
Correct. I
not
mean, I
one and
remember
done.
the days where it's like every time we wanted to have a webinar like this, we had to like circulate a sheet around every single partner and then, oh, guess what? We were doing another one next month. We had to do it again because we couldn't use that same sheet. So we are long past those days.
We are. Yeah, you know what? Technology, it's helping. I mean, some of it's making our lives a little more challenging, but it's gonna help us. Thank you, Katie, and welcome. We're so excited to have you here. I'm always happy to share any room with Katie because she's just makes me feel so much smarter. So another person that makes me feel really smart is Danny Estrada. Danny is an industry leader that has honestly helped shape the way firms approach digital transformation. So, Danny brings over 2 decades of expertise in CRM strategy, digital adoption, and business transformation with a strong focus on the accounting and legal sector. He's also the founder of E Squared Advisors and is a recognized thought leader who has worked with firms of all sizes to streamline their client engagement and drive performance through technology. He's a featured contributor to CRM Magazine. He's a sought out speaker. We're lucky to have him here, and a trusted advisor when it comes to aligning technology with strategic growth. So, fortunate to have you along with us today, Danny. So, as we go into this, I don't know what you do on your free time either, since you and Katie are busy solving all sorts of problems. When you look at data integrity management, what do you think are the first steps firms should take to identify the records within their CRMs that will make pulling a contact list for a survey or any marketing easier?
I think one of the advantages of CRM, so we have to remember where a lot of these firms came from. A lot of these firms came from not having marketing departments, not having CRM, not having marketing automation, being told to use time and billing as their CRM, the limitations of those platforms. And so one of the things that really comes to mind for me is segmentation. So that's one of the advantages of CRM technologies is being able to profile at both the business to business level and also at the individual contact level, because firms have that unique value add that they're a lot like nonprofits, that they'll do business with both businesses and with individuals. So whether I'm doing a tax return, an audit, a 1040, whatever, and then even in that world of 1040s, segmentation is not the same, right? Somebody who's just comfortable working with an accounting firm but doesn't necessarily have a high net worth is not the same as a family office or somebody else like that. So it's also, the messages can be significantly different. And the one thing we know today, especially that Katie will harp on, is know who you're talking to, right? Because nobody's filling anything out. Nobody's taking the next best action unless whatever the message is speaks to me directly. So that's one of the most important lessons when it comes to what am I pulling from CRM? Well, how do you have it segmented? That would be the first place I would go.
Oh, it's a great question to ask yourself as you're embarking looking into all of your segmentation. It is like data cleanup, like if we're all using different systems. So I think as we dive into this topic deeper, any attendee that's here, pop into the chat. What tools are you using right now? What there's a variety of them, and you might not be using any. You might be real old school. But if you've got your CRM, whatever you've got, throw it in. Kind of helpful to see what people are up against. HubSpot, Apollo, nice. We've got some activity there. It's interesting to think you've got a variety of systems. You also have billing systems that you're utilizing, and how do all of these things speak to each other? Do they speak to each other? Technology continues to evolve, and it will get better. But this is an ongoing process. So there's a lot of steps to take. So if you're looking into your billing systems, what are some of the initial considerations to keep in mind when taking that first step of assessing your current data and setup? So Danny, if you're looking into this, like what if you don't have an integration, and what if you do? What are some of those initial steps?
So one of the first things that I mentioned goes back to the history of where we came from, right? So one of the very common missteps that I see with people that do undertake like what's on the screen here, like something like a HubSpot or something else, is once they deploy that, the firm still keeps entering contacts into a time and billing system when relatively the only contact that really matters, you can't use the contacts for anything in most of those systems. So the only thing that really matters is the billing contact, which is kind of irrelevant for a lot of the purposes that we're talking about here today around surveys, unless you did a survey specifically to what could we do better and how we work with you, right? Then you might get a very high hit rate. But that's really the first misstep that we take, because a lot of times contacts should be migrated one time out of the time and billing system when you stand up something else like this. And then when you stand that up, then it's an education for the firm. Oh, going forward for our client intake, we're only going to push the billing contact in, and the systems don't necessarily need to talk in that way. So then how would they need to talk? Well, it's that segmentation thing we talked about, right? Because a lot of times, again, clients are going to be all over the place, right? So if I have a client and I'm doing CAS, I'm doing part-time CFO, part-time controller, HR, is a lot different than somebody who's just doing only audit or only tax compliance. Tax compliance and tax consulting can also be different. The service codes within time and billing. So again, these are things that how do I get this information without having to survey or talk to partners or do things where people really, handcuffed with their time, is that those are the types of things where integration does make sense, right? So you have a mapping from one to the other. The other thing that I should mention is a lot of times we talk about golden records, right? So once somebody gets pushed from a CRM system, marketing automation platform, there should be a segmentation or a tagging of whether somebody is a client or a prospect, right? Because once they're a client, then again, the way that things should work is if you're going to update an address, the golden record is now the time and billing system because there are invoice implications and things like that. And then you can still get the accurate data back to CRM, having a feed that actually comes and updates addresses and or legal name changes or things like that.
Ooh, very helpful. Katie, what are your thoughts on just those challenges of data integration? And if you have any examples to share, that would be helpful too.
I think the key is to get it right. And, we work for these accountant-minded people that are like, okay, great, put it in the system. It's like you push a button and it's done. And you've actually got to take the steps to sit there and go, no, like this is called this and this is called this. And actually figuring it out. I was working with a firm a few years ago that was in the middle of this. So they were in the middle. And so they're trying to pull from both systems and, kind of compare. Well, what happened is they ended up pulling a list for their client survey, and it included all their lower level tax clients whom they didn't want to survey. Even better, it included those ones who just like 3 weeks before literally sent them a letter saying you need to find a new accountant. So as you can imagine, they had wonderful, wonderful things to say.
Yeah.
And that was just because, they were in the messy middle of that integration. And so things like mapping over the fees, that kind of stuff becomes very important. So, I was working with another firm just this week on their list. And when they pulled the list, I actually got the fees because I'm like, okay, right then below this amount, I can make sure they're gone. The other thing I think you see in this industry specifically is how it's set up. Is it the client grouping? Is each client a separate entity? All of that provides some complexity when you go to do the data integration and just making sure you understand that so it's mapped properly.
Ooh. Well, that should really make everybody feel better that pulling data can have a lot of varying implications. So understanding what you're pulling, what it's going to be used for. This really comes up a lot when you're just trying to ensure you're engaging the right people. So we've seen this, and we consult our clients. We pull in Katie all the time to sit here and talk about when you have a goal, a purpose in mind. You want to be surveying your clients, as that example. You want to make sure you understand what the purpose, that goal of that survey is. Then align. You need to be aligning internally on who those client-facing contacts are. Who is it going to be? And as Danny and Katie have both touched on, when you've got the right segmentation, when you've done whatever, if it's a manual import of your data from billing into your CRM that you're going to be utilizing, making sure you're all understanding what segments are being used. You're pulling clients, not prospects. You are pulling the right folks that you want to get feedback on, because otherwise you're going to have a really kind of a terrible experience internally and for your customers. It's going to be really confusing if you've just told somebody that they're no longer your client, and then you ask them how their client experience is. Let's avoid that. So making sure you're reviewing, validating those contact lists with internal stakeholders before you launch any surveys, before you start launching any marketing communication. All of these things work together, and you can use it for multiple purposes. So as you're going through this too, Katie, one of the things that we talk through with our clients about, and it's a concern that kind of comes up, is trying to engage those partners and stakeholders and trying to get them to understand the importance of keeping this data really relevant, clean, and updated. How would you best advise anyone that's listening, going to watch this later? They'll rewind and hit repeat on replay. But how do you get those partners engaged and on board?
So, I think we got to step back from the tech and the data for a minute, and this comes back to the internal politicking of your firm. So there is some reason that you're doing a survey. You're trying to, get client information. It's because somebody believes strongly in it. It's part of your strategic plan. There's some reason. So you need to tie back to that. And I think when it comes to surveying, it can't be gray. This is something that has to be incredibly black and white. Here's who we're surveying. Here's the line in the sand. Okay, so we know we're surveying clients over X dollars. And, we're going to survey or a minimum of 10 per biller or whatever. You just got to define that line very, very clearly and make sure it's pushed out from the top down. So now, when from the top down, here's our process and here's our data and here's where we're pulling, there's a reason for those billers to actually make sure that data is in there right, because they're not going to be able to review the list. They're not, it's like, hey, here it is, the system, this is our truth. We're going to go and rely on that, whether hopefully it's your CRM, but if it's your practice management, whatever it is. And so they've got some invested interest then in actually making sure data in the system is correct and accurate.
Yeah, that's helpful. Danny, what are your thoughts? As you sit and work with leaders and various firm sizes, how do you best get that partner buy-in?
So we've been talking about the firm of the future for a couple of decades now. And, last year at Summit, when I was speaking, I was like, maybe it's just too big. You can't eat an elephant, but one bite at a time. So maybe it's just too big for a lot of these people to deal with. So what I have found is find something that people can consume and live with, like Katie said, and then build from there. And so what that means is, for a lot of the partners, once I get some mind share, then I have to do something structurally to get them to stay. So in a lot of instances, that's a data governance committee or something where there's actually a firm commitment. The other thing, and the other thing that I said last year was, maybe we do one thing starting out to just not be the firm of the past, right? And so one of the first biggest goals for a lot of firms nowadays is to be data-driven organization. And so in order to do that, it's finding ways that say, okay, I know this is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. What are other methods that I can introduce to you using AI or enrichment from other platforms that talk together that can actually make this job easier? And then, like Katie said, let's put a line in the sand. If we haven't interacted or talked to somebody in X period of time, then we're not going to try and communicate with them anymore. because trying to maintain data that's over like 2 years old, it's almost impossible. So people have enough jobs to do every day when they wake up. And so when partners feel like they don't have to manage or be responsible for all of the data all the time, and they can put some plumbing. I always say profitability comes from people, process, and plumbing, and the technology is generally the plumbing. But it can also be a process or a committee. And once we can get that put in place and they know that somebody else has the responsibility, they've signed off that it's important, but it's now somebody's job to do that, and report on it, then a lot of times they feel a lot better, because partners already have 8 jobs when they woke up this morning. Adding a 9th isn't going to help anybody.
So there's a firm that I was talking to recently that actually built Net Promoter Score into their partner performance evaluations. So I know at first I was like, oh my gosh. And then I was like, hold on. Let's step back. Because if you want this to be successful long term, we got to talk about how do you get enough data to make it statistically accurate. But the marketer said to me, and I'm like, you're spot on. She's like, I'm going to get the contact information at the clients. No longer do I have, and as Danny mentioned when we kicked off, like, accounts payable at ABC company. Like they're going to make sure I get the names of the people I have to talk to because it's part of their performance evaluation. So
Yeah, I would agree. I just had a conversation this past week with a firm that's growing really, really fast. And, her pushback was, well, the partners maintain the relationships at these clients. I'm like, okay, that's true, but you're responsible for the growth of the firm, and you don't know who the VP of HR is, and you sell HR solutions. You don't know who the CIO is, and you sell technology solutions. So, you just need to get buy-in from the partner of, hey, we're going to go turning over other stones and finding other people. And that also goes back to the enrichment, knowing what somebody's current title is versus the day it gets put in the system. Because what most people don't know is, in the history of both industry and accounting, most contact records in any CRM are edited 0 or 1 time, 99% of them. So if you're not current and you're sending somebody an email and calling them the controller when they're now the CFO, you're also not doing yourself any favors. But it's really about, like Katie said, knowing the client, right? So in financial services, they have this big thing called KYC, know your customer. Well, accounting firms and law firms that I deal with, they're some of the worst at knowing more than 1 or 2 people. Starts there.
Ooh, yeah. And knowing your customer and then relaying what you know about them back to them can be a dangerous situation if you don't have it right, because it can feel like, wait, I pay you to run my audit and you have my name spelled wrong. Those little things.
Sure, we talk about the when. Because I recently got started on a client experience project with a top 15 firm. And it was still amazing to me in a firm that size that, they were like my old firm, KPMG, where we did things like once a year, right? I'm like, okay, so let me get this right. So I finished my audit with you 4 months ago. I get a survey this morning, but on the way to the office, I stub my toe, right? Somebody bumps me in traffic, makes me spill my coffee. And then I get to the office and open my laptop. And what I'm about to fill out has nothing to do with what happened 4 months ago. It has to do with, how I'm feeling right now. And that can be as much of an impact. That's been my whole problem with things like MPS for a long time, is like, it's got to have relevance, right? And then once we got to that conversation, I asked them about their customer journeys, and they're like, customer what? like, so you go through this process of landing the business, then it gets pushed down here and works its way back up to you when you're going to ask more business. But there are other players along the way that have an opinion, and they might even have influence. Because if I
Mhm.
finish the audit, I might ask my staff, hey, how did that go? How'd you like working with those people? Well, if I never ask, if I don't know the answer to that, it's like being in court. Don't ask the question to something you don't know already know the answer to, right? So I think the when matters a lot in these circumstances as well, because the data is always the hardest part, and then it's the when.
Well, I think something you mentioned, Danny, when you talked about the records never being updated, I was like, yeah, I can see that, but that's a awful number because there needs to be certain things marked in the system at a certain point of time. Like, for example, we've got, John Doe at ABC Company. Well, then we open an estate for John Doe. Like, we need to go back and mark that John Doe's not at that company anymore. Or heaven forbid if we send something to John Doe's spouse when she knows that we open an estate. Like, little things like that is really important for data integrity to not just do what I need to get the client billing number so I can send them the bill, but to actually make sure that client data is correct.
It is all about timeliness, because if you are, as you both have mentioned here, that a project ends, you've given them back. Here's your audit. Here's your tax return. Here's this project that we have finished. We should be finding out right then while it's happening. Some audits can take, it's not a week long process. It is a in-depth, you're putting in a lot of work. The place you don't want to drop the ball is when you are in this process and not knowing that you've dropped the ball. Like measuring satisfaction, health throughout the journey, you're going to get a realistic view of where you stand and what you can recover, and maybe some opportunities of where you could be adding additional value. It is very, very critical to make sure as a project ends, especially when a project ends, all of your data is up to date. So you know what project it is, and you can even then ask specific questions about what happened in that project and maybe who was involved. So you know, as the firm partner, as the leader here, the health of that customer before you turn around and ask them for more business. They might not be so happy to if they're unhappy with the last service that you provided. When you're going through this journey, Danny, what are you really consulting on and advising on to make sure they get this journey right?
So, so the first thing is structuring and prioritizing the data so that everyone knows. The next thing is what we call the golden rule of data, which is once data has been entered somewhere, it should never need to be rekeyed, right? Because that costs time and money that people generally don't have. And as you grow your firm, you're going to need to add headcount to do that unless you've put technology in place to do these things, right? Then the responsibility for monitoring and updating, not all information, but just like Katie said, some things that are particularly critical. And then the last piece is people struggle with how they consume the data in a meaningful way. What do I mean by that? So, for instance, one of my clients has a technology and AI platform that a lot of accounting firms use, and it basically tells them when somebody has changed jobs. Well, I might want to know that. Like if my biggest client, their CFO left, and I don't know who the new CFO is, or if they're bringing their own accounting firm. So basically, what we did was we used the data from that to actually build a report for each individual partner that shows them not everybody who's changed jobs, but people only of a certain title level,
Mm-hmm.
VP or above. And so now it's the presentation of that information. So another instance relating back to surveys is I have another client who, has this pretty cool feature in one of the technologies that they own that actually has the ability to send information from different systems before meeting with the client. So now they're presenting survey results in that email, right? So I know, hey, I haven't thought about it, but yeah, let's see what they said on their last survey before, because I haven't met with them in 4 months. In 2019, Walters Kluwer did this survey, and 81% of people that left their accounting firm for another firm say they don't get enough love. Well, knowing your client is also, don't just survey, do something with the information, right? So if they score a certain amount, I have a client that actually creates now a ticket in CRM and assigns it to the partner. So they make sure that somebody goes and does follow up because it was below a 70, right? Things like that. But yeah, I think it's really the linchpin is the actionable things or the reports that you present or the information that gets presented to specific people for a specific reason.
And then I think, Danny, and you can probably answer this too, is I think one thing is as firms are doing this and looking at the data, there's always that, what's our one source of truth? Is that CRM? Is it practice management? For decades, it's been practice management. I'm hearing more and more firms that are actually saying, oh no, it's going to be the CRM, because I think that's important. Like, as data's feeding back and forth, where do you always go for the most up-to-date, the most current info? And if it's not there, there's one firm that said to me, like, if it's not there, it doesn't exist. So, I think that's part of it, is you've got to figure out what that is for your organization. And are you seeing that being CRM in more instances, Danny?
Yeah, so I kind of said it at the beginning and just now when we were talking about like the concept of the golden record, right? Because that when at KPMG, we kind of had deployed our first ever CRM, and then it became, well, is it Salesforce? Is it SAP? Is it like, what is it? And then we had to basically build those business rules that says, okay, once it's in my time and billing, the golden record of a client is actually in SAP or in the back end, and it gets updated there and feeds to CRM. But ultimately, yes, CRM for most of my clients, it's a teaching point that does become the master communication database, right? So we don't call it marketing, we don't call it this, we just say that is the system of record for any client engagement or communications. And so they don't think of it strictly as marketing, because that's one thing a lot of partners have problems with is words people use, right? I don't want you marketing to my clients. I'm sure many people on this webinar have heard that phrase before, but if you term it, oh, this is our database for client communications, they don't hear it that way, and they don't necessarily put up walls either. So yeah, Katie, almost every one of my clients, CRM is the database. And by the way, if you really want to get adoption, once people start calling it our system and not the system, then you have buy-in.
Or marketing system, because that's how they view it. Oh, that's a marketing tool. And it's not. It's a firm management tool.
Right. Think of it as an operational heartbeat, right? In both industry and accounting and law, that's one of the things that sometimes it takes me a year to get that point across, is that these platforms are very, very robust today, and they should be your operational heartbeat.
And I think the key is, and for anybody that needs to hear this, you can go back to your managing partner or power that be, is technology does talk to one another. I remember 10 years ago, and we go to our practice management software and they're like, oh yeah, we sync. And then we try to sync and they didn't really sync. It's like, oh, well, we only sync with this proprietary stuff, and we got to keep our hands and our control. And it was a mess. Well, today we've come such a long way that if you've been told no before, the answer is it's probably not no in 2025. And so that's the key of, let's get all of the systems, all these places that you have data into the single place. So you have that data warehouse out there that's feeding it out to all the various technologies that you use.
Yeah, there are two key points about that. So number one, I mean, back in 2010, again, working with Walters Kluwer, like, people were just saying, hey, this can't be done. And within a year, I had, CCH Pro system integrated with 4 different CRM platforms. But that lesson too today is, believe it or not, some people are still, I know a firm of 1,000 people that's still on Pro System. And now we're having to do that same exercise, right? But you're right, Katie. All the major players today, it's not completely, everything's not completely open, but there's enough open in there to where we can do significant integration between those systems today. There aren't that many barriers.
technology is advanced. You don't need to have all of these tools not talking to each other. Just opens the door for inconsistent data, poor records, and then distrust of what information is correct, which then slows everything down. So as you look at this, Katie, what do you think the cadence of having your data really monitored, updated, what do you recommend?
I think there has to be some guidelines about here's what we update and when. Like a client passes away, like a record has to be updated. I was on the phone with a firm and we were talking about a client survey and say, Katie, right now we can do it once a year, we can go pull that list, but what do I have to do in my systems to be able to do that post engagement? And so how do we know an engagement's done? How do we know that audit's done or that tax returns have been delivered to actually go ahead and trigger the survey? So, we had a lot of conversation about, well, what are the fields in your system? Like, how can we close it? How do we mark something as closed? And what does that look like? Well, if that's going to be important to your firm, then that needs to be a standard. Like, it has to be closed. I mean, the company sells and they don't exist anymore. Just close that record or whatever it is. So I believe there are standards that you have to put in place because without those, one, we look silly, and that's not great for the firm and its reputation if we're sending something out that doesn't happen, and then you can build that into your regular cadence. I'm also seeing firms that are like, oh well, how do we put somebody in an industry? Here's how we track it. What does that look like when we go over? Or if you want a survey, you're putting a survey together and, well, we want to make sure we have at least X representation from all of our industry focus areas, then that's a key piece of data. So I would start with what are those absolute must-have pieces of data that we've got to update. If you can get those done, when Danny said most records are updated once, like I would like go do a cartwheel down the middle of the street because it doesn't happen. But have your musts.
Oh, yeah, it is. The cartwheel down the street. That's the goal here. That's what we're going to try to end at, right? Danny,
Sure.
what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so to answer the question directly is, firms used to be traditionally, like I have one client, they're 100% tax, right? So, okay, well, that milestone has passed. So now we give you X amount of time to go and update all your records, right? Some are audit, different time frame. Okay, but once that's passed, different type of record. And then now I have firms that are as much as 60 or 70% revenue in advisory, and those projects end all the time. So then for them, we're like, okay, well, then you have to do it 4 times a year because your stuff's always rolling off. So, and these are the items, again, the data governance committee says these are the items we care about. So you don't have to update everything. So people don't go, oh, you're just giving me a bunch of busy work. And then the other thing that I do is I go back to them and I say, how's it going? Are you now prepared to see what AI or enrichment sources are out there? Like somebody happened to mention a particular platform on this call that they're using, and I have a lot of firms that tie that to a CRM and use that for enrichment of records, right? So it'll check, oh yeah, we do see some variances because you can pick and choose what fields you want to bring in. So you're not necessarily having to go find people or ask them or update you. Like there are other methods of being able to get those kinds of updates.
One question that we just got was that I would love to get both of your opinion on is looking at the biggest barriers you've seen at when integrating systems together.
Happy to jump in on this one first. The first one that I deal with most is really the understanding of leadership and ownership of why. That's the biggest thing because they see it as an expense, not as a process improvement or a time saver or an operational pickup to get people back to doing whatever it is that they were doing, or they don't understand You know, every firm I've worked with has been talking to me about cross-sell for 25 years. And so the biggest barrier to the cross-sell has always been the integration of the systems. And so it's getting that buy-in from people. And then the second thing that you'll run into is literally not having an expert that knows CRM like the back of their hand or marketing like the back of their hand, and also knows the time and billing systems like the back of their hand. Because I just had a client that spent over $1 million last year integrating, and then they had me take a look at it, and they're like, yeah, we think we overdid this. I'm like, yeah, I mean, like, you Chernobyl this thing. Like, you way overcooked it. I'm like, there's no way any partner in any one of the, you know, your member firms that you bought, because they're backed by PE. I was like, this is insane. They're like, is it fixable? I'm like, no, you need to start with an expert, and we need to start from scratch, because there's no way to fix something like this. And so those are the biggest barriers that I see generally is, you know, calling in a general doctor when you need a brain surgeon. And then the rest of it can go kind of smoothly, because the last piece is, again, that governance of having an approach to integrations, knowing that it's not going to be permanent. You need to go back and look at it within certain periods of time, and then make an assessment. Do I stay, or do I change it, or do I get rid of it? Because like you both said, technology changes. And so you have to prepare for that when you're doing integrations. The technology is going to change, and you need to have a process to deal with.
That process piece. It is. And I think too, one of the things that you touched on, and Katie has touched on this too, is training. Making sure you're training and understanding why. Why is this important? You're right. You don't have to update every single field. You don't need everything down to the fine line detail, but what is the most important and why? Katie, some additional thoughts on really how to implement training, how to maintain this to be ongoing and not just a one-time action.
You know, and I think you've got to approach it as that. You know, I've talked to marketers before, and they're like, I've already did training last year. Well, guess what? It doesn't stop. You know what I mean? That's like, you know, with each round of training, you might get 1 or 2 people bought in, but when you look at the number of people in your firm, there's still more people not bought in. So I think that's got to be part of it. And I think the other thing is in a firm, if you have somebody who's just not going to use CRM, some old dogs you just can't teach new tricks to. So what is your workaround in that case? You know, so there was one firm, and I was like, okay, so don't even get him a license. Can we get it to an administrative person and put all his records under the administrative person's name? Like, what is the workaround that works for your firm? So one, I think is that, how do you do that ongoing training? How do you do check-ins? I'm a big proponent of not fixing when somebody makes a mistake. So if there's an error in a data record, I would be like, okay, let's get on the phone, and I'm going to show you how to change that right now. You're going to change it, and I'm going to watch, because then they're not going to have this call again and waste their time. They might do it, you know, right the first time. So yeah, it's not a one and done as much as we want. And, you know, continuing to get more out of our CRM should be part of your regular training program, part of your check-ins and reinforcement.
Oh, you know what? Finding those workarounds is brilliant, because we're all going to approach somebody that's just not going to be able to adopt. And that's okay.
And I would say I have 3 things in relation to that. Number 1 is the augmentation, is what we call it. I do have a firm that basically got some of their older partners an 800 number, and whenever they have a client meeting, they just call and they talk about what happened. They talk about any action items for any people. All of it gets transcribed and mailed to somebody, and then somebody else goes through the process of getting that structured in CRM. Number 2 is I have firms that are now using survey technology constantly to survey their own employees. You know, like a rosebud and thorns. What's going well? What's not going well? What would you do differently? And they're doing it with regular cadence. People don't mind sharing. And so, and they'll send one type of survey to people who are active users of CRM. They'll send another type of survey to people that log in twice a month or once every 3 months, right? And so the last piece is playbooks. So if it's not written, it's not strategic. So the thing I do most commonly to anybody who's had a CRM for even more than a year or two is you put in a playbook that has business terminology, it has best practices, the benefit to you, the benefit to the firm, and then a set of commandments or standards. It's accountability. At a minimum, what are you responsible for? And so it's clear, it's written. Again, it can be assessed and changed, but having a playbook for these systems, it also makes the systems, because they can do a lot less intimidating.
Oh, that is a golden piece of advice there, Danny. Love that. I know we're coming up on time. So if there's any questions, please submit them. I'm not sure if we'll have time to answer them, but we'll reply and get you those answers via email. Thank you both, Katie and Danny, for participating in this. I think we've covered a ton of ground. I feel like we could probably talk for another hour. Really, like the things that we want to hit on and reiterate is the importance of data integrity and accuracy is key. I love the advice of not calling this all marketing. That just turns people off and that won't get your adoption that you really want. Also, Katie's advice of look at if they're not gonna follow, find a new route for them. And Danny's advice of getting a playbook from the start. Like that is incredible. I would like both of you just to leave with one piece of advice for attendees and the future folks that are going to watch this that they can take away, because you're both, I just want to keep pulling out of your noggins any advice. So Katie, if you would go first, please.
I'll keep it short and sweet. Consistency, consistency, consistency. So how you do stuff, to how you enter data, to your playbook, your processes, the regular consistency is going to help get people on board doing what they need to be doing. If you keep changing, moving the cheese, people won't be able to follow. So be consistent.
Danny?
Yeah, for me, I think the piece of advice is I find I come across a lot of people that are kind of frustrated in their situation because they don't necessarily know how to get partners to engage in a way that will actually move the needle. And so I would say lean on people externally that work in a lot of boardrooms, that have a lot of stories of other firms that your partners will know, and can actually help you find a way to get to them in a way that actually can get them to listen and possibly even change.
Oh, that external advice, the experience that when you've seen something happen multiple times just is so insightful. You're not flying blind. So don't fly blind. Pull in advice, get in the help. You've got a network, you've got us. So reach out to us on LinkedIn, connect with us. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. And thank you both. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Katie, for participating in this, and for every attendee for joining us. We will send out a recording, and maybe we'll see each other at AIM, the conference that's coming up. Here we go. So on that note, thank you all. Have a great weekend and the rest of your day. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.